All right. So again, welcome everyone. You're here because you want to watch Tasha Taylor talk about body mortification and self. Sorry, my computer popped up now. So, body mortification and self-annihilation in women's horror films. Tasha Taylor is a former academic turned freelance critic, hailing from Appalachia with a PhD from Loughborough University in the United Kingdom and now based in New York. She has previously published and spoken on topics of, respectively, queerness, classism, and rurality in horror, and bodily abjection in horror manga. Her film interests include extreme horror, gore aesthetics, and the question of why it's scary when rural characters laugh. When she isn't overthinking these things, she's working on a horror film of her own and studying botanical illustration. All right, take it away.
Thank you. Well, firstly, I'm honored to be contributing to this event amongst so many really excellent presentations, some of which I've already seen, some of which I'll be catching later. And I'm also honored to be closing it out. But unfortunately, this is not going to be a feel-good ending. So to set the tone or to give the innocent a warning, I want to start with a quote from the narrative of the martyr Vibia Perpetua. During those few days in prison, I was baptized and I was inspired by the Spirit not to ask for any other favor, but simply to endure the torment of the flesh. So, this is taken from the third century narrative of Perpetua and Felicitas, which, if we're thinking about women in horror, this is actually one of the earliest pieces of Christian ascetic writing by a woman. And there's a number of translations of this text. Not all of them include that word torment. So it should be another sign as to where we're going that I picked this particular translation. So while there are many films that can be discussed under the heading of bodily mortification and self-annihilation in women's horror films, my main case studies will be Karin Gebbe's 2013 debut, Tore Tanzt, distributed in Anglophone countries as Nothing Bad Can Happen, and Rose Glass's debut feature, Saint Maud. Later in this talk, I will juxtapose these films with two supplementary films by male filmmakers, Pascal Augier's 2008 Martyrs and 2025's Bring Her Back by Danny and Michael Filippo, collectively known to internet denizens as Raka Raka. My selection of films can be summarized as bleak cinema, if you want to be fancy, or feel bad movies, if you want to be more direct. Neither of my two main case studies nor my supplementary films have happy or hopeful endings, and you can always expect to find at least one of them in those disturbing movies I will never watch again lists on social media. They are also some of my favorite contemporary films. You absolutely never want me in charge of a movie night. This talk, just to give a bit more of a warning before we get in here, and to give the innocent a chance to uh, peace out if they would like. This talk contains spoilers for all four of these films, as well as frank discussions and imagery of religious trauma, mental illness, sexual assault, self-harm, and suicide. So, just to reiterate my point, this is not going to be a feel-good ending. All right, that's a lot of text on that slide, isn't it? Wow. Um, you look at it and you're like, why did I do that? So before we get into these films themselves, I want to take a moment to explicate the type of mortification I'm focusing on and how it contextualizes my case studies within a much larger tradition. While the word has a variety of meanings and in contemporary vernacular is often used to describe embarrassment, my usage here corresponds to its classical meaning, which concerned the ascetic deprivation and denial of pleasure to the mind and body. Mortification of the flesh has traditionally ranged from such simple acts as denying comforts, for instance, wearing uncomfortable or even painful clothing, eating unsavory or rotten foods, sexual abstinence, etc., to physical violence, to the complete destruction of the body. Such acts could be adopted by those seeking union with the divine in the Christian context by sharing in the suffering of Christ, or could be inflicted upon another, as we see in the countless narratives of tortured and executed saints. And I'll just take a moment to go over some of these quotations on this topic. The first one we have from Susan Sontag's famous and infamous regarding the pain of others. The iconography of suffering has a long pedigree. The sufferings most often deemed worthy of representation are those understood to be the product of wrath, divine or human. The innumerable versions in painting and sculpture of the Passion of Christ and the inexhaustible visual catalog of the fiendish executions of the Christian martyrs. These are surely intended to move and excite, and in the case of the Christian saints, feel admonished or inspired by model faith and fortitude, but these are destinies beyond deploring or contesting. And the next one from Camporesi's The Incorruptible Flesh. Medieval fascination with the behavior of saintly bodies under postmortem sets the scene for a morbid and nightmarish drama of which their bones, flesh, and blood are the tormented protagonists, engaged in a long and restless eater or path, which persisted in some cases across the ages. Now I'll move to Brown's Body and Society. The pain of Christian asceticism consisted in the fact that the present human person was an unfinished block, destined to be cut into the form of an awesome model. The body required the deep chisel bites of permanent renunciation. And because even though I am no longer formally in academia, it is illegal in multiple states and countries for me to talk about horror without citing Kristeva. And with her, mystical Christendom turned this abjection of self into the ultimate proof of humility before God. So, as you can see, we're looking at essentially proto-torture porn, but through this lens of holiness. All right. So the most visible manifestation of this tradition in the Christian context, which is the context that has the greatest influence on most of the films I'm going to be talking about today, and especially my two main case studies, is the image of the mortified saint. So stories and artistic renderings of saints being tortured have characterized Christian iconography through its entire history. And while these images I've got up here are gruesome, they nonetheless depict what their intended audience see as transcendence. So I've got a little sampling of us here. We've got, I'm not sure how well it actually shows up for other people. We've got Saint Sebastian impaled with arrows. We've got Saint Bartholomew skinned. We have Saint Agatha having her breasts literally cut off. Let's see, over here we have Saint Erasmus being eviscerated. The bottom we have Saint Stephen being stoned, and on the bottom right, Saint Appalachia bound to a board with her teeth being plucked from her skull. So important is mortification of the flesh to communion with the divine and transcendence in these narratives and in this iconography, that the iconography of certain saints actually reappropriates the weapons that tortured and killed them as symbols of their posthumous power. So let's see, we'll go here. We've got up there in the corner, in that left-hand corner, Saint Agatha. Again, we've got her twice, actually. The first one up in the left-hand corner is her holding the device that was used to remove her breasts. That second image is Saint Agatha holding her severed breasts on a plate. Similarly, we have Saint Apollonia holding the device that was used to tear her teeth out. And over on the far right side of the screen, we have Saint Dymphna holding the sword with which she was beheaded. And then at the bottom, we have one that's really going to bring us to our first film, The Cross of Saint Peter. And the upside down cross is quite a controversial symbol. It's one that is most often known as opposition to Christianity, but in early Christendom, the upside down cross was the sign of St. Peter's belief that being crucified, he was not worthy to be crucified in the same bodily position as Christ, and requested the inversion. And this symbol is actually combined with other symbology in Nothing Bad Can Happen. And we'll actually see that in just a moment. Before moving on in this discussion, I also want to note, though, that as a number of scholars, including Perkins, have written, mortification of the flesh also has a political purpose in addition to its theological purpose. Um, so what we see here, especially in a lot of these narratives where these saints were executed by state authorities, is the use of torture, mortification, and, mortal wounds, fatal wounds, grievous, dramatic wounds. Things like out of Saw, essentially. Um, these being used to punish people who have gotten out of line, who have gone against some type of authority, whether that authority is the one accepted by their society, like an enemy as they perceive them to be, or if it is a totally outside force. So internal, external oppression politically going on in a lot of these. I want to note before moving on to the films that this political purpose is quite alive and well today. I'm not going to quote any of these texts because of their links to certain contemporary political persons and events. But even in the 2000s, I mean, from the very beginning of the century, even to now, we see influential clergy romanticizing mortification of the flesh to their followers, while, of course, giving no sign that they themselves would elect to endure this type of suffering. And we will come back to that point. Okay. So now that, we're all probably vaguely traumatized by this, we're gonna keep the trauma going. All right, so this brings us to our first case study. Again, this is Katrin Gebbe's 2013 German film, Nothing Bad Can Happen, originally entitled Tora Tanzt or Tora Dances. Its English title is actually the more famous one, and Gebbe and some of the other filmmakers do refer to it by that title in quite a few of the paratexts. So as we can see up there in that left-hand corner, we have the symbol of an evangelical group that I'll get to in just a moment, with the addition of the St. Peter's cross. And I love paratextual material. So in the American Blu-ray release by Draft House Films, the interior image is the main character, Torah, next to the St. Peter's cross without this symbol. It's just him and the cross. Okay, this film is nowhere near as popular as it should be. So I will not assume that everyone here has seen it. If you have not seen it, I highly recommend it, but only if you have an extremely strong stomach for the stuff that I'm about to talk about. So in this film, Tora, a devout and socially isolated young man with epilepsy in Hamburg, takes up with the Jesus Freaks, a real-life German punk-influenced evangelical youth movement. When he becomes disillusioned with the Freaks, he finds a new home with a low-income family consisting of the ill-tempered macho patriarch Benno, the cynical but compliant wife Astrid, their moody teenage daughter Sani, and their very young son Dennis. Morbidly curious and even offended by Tora's faith, Benno begins abusing him with acts that start with hitting, mockery, and starvation, and culminate in sexually trafficking him and ultimately murdering him. Rather than protesting, Tora endures these escalating acts out of a simultaneous belief that doing so brings him closer to Christ, and a hope that Sani's life will somehow improve after he has seen that she is also the victim of abuse. Throughout the film, Tora's faith is challenged but is never lost, and he dies much in the same manner as a classical saint or martyr. This film is very much, as Delarue identifies in one of the only scholarly treatments of the film currently published, especially in English, a hagiography. I went too far? Okay. All right, so Katrin Gebbe, who we see posing in front of the poster for her debut film here, has alluded to a real-life crime as her inspiration for writing the film. To my knowledge, she has never identified the case, though it is not only very identifiable, but also clearly the basis for several specific acts, locations, and characterizations in her film. In an interview available on the film's American Blu-ray release, she is very careful not to name the victim or the perpetrators, and though she says she obtained permission from the victim's mother to use the crime as the inspiration for a film, she admits that she and producer Verena Graefe-Hofte stopped pouring through media on the crime in order to detach their story from the real one. Similarly to her sensitivity to the real-life crime, Gebbe exercised a sensitive approach to the real-life Jesus freak community, which resulted in them approving of her use of their symbols, their aesthetic, and even some of their music, which we do hear in the film. As she relates in multiple interviews, her interest in creating Torah and his story was to explore the question of what, apart from familial relations, romantic or sexual attraction, or financial entanglement, might compel an adult to remain in an abusive situation. I will follow Gebbe's lead in not stating any explicitly identifying details of the real case, but it bears acknowledging that the victim was said to be devoutly Christian. Despite this, Gebbe and Graefe-Hofte say that Tora's faith was actually a late addition to the character, as Gebbe worked backwards to determine a potential motive for enduring such abuse. So, despite the film's intimate correspondence to faith and this tradition of martyrology, essentially, its makers did not actually set out to critique or even explore religion at all. Yet religion is what binds Torah to his fate. He first encounters Benno when he and a fellow Jesus freak, Al, see Benno's car broken down on the road. The young men have no jumper cables, but they do have another resource, Jesus. Torah leans over the hood of the car and asks Jesus to start it again, and the car starts. To Torah, there is no question that his prayer worked, and he likewise interprets nearly every other interaction he has through the lens of divine providence. His devotion to his faith stands out even amongst the other Jesus freaks. Though they are supposed to perform basic mortification through abstinence from intoxicating substances and premarital sex, Torah discovers that Al is engaging in a sexual relationship with a young woman he has recently inducted into the group. Horrified, he accepts Benno's invitation to stay with his family on their allotment, and the gradually escalating abuse he suffers at Benno's hands becomes, to him, a test of his faith and an opportunity to model Christ's suffering and love. While religion permeates every moment of this film by virtue of Torah's motivations, the film resists the label of religious horror, as it never engages with the supernatural. The seeming miracle of Benno's car starting after Torah's prayer is almost certainly coincidental, but I do leave room for doubt here because the film itself is uninterested in proving Torah right or wrong. Rather, Gebbe confronts the viewer with the horrors of man. The mortification Torah suffers within the text becomes, for the viewer, a demonstration of vulnerability in a world where the vulnerable are all too often rendered inconvenient and expendable. And I will be returning to that in just a few minutes as well. Torah's faith is compounded by his epilepsy, which is frequently triggered by overstimulating environments and distress. His second encounter with Benno occurs when Benno goes to a Jesus freak bar. While dancing frenetically to Christian metal, Torah suffers a seizure and collapses, and Benno carries him to safety. When they later discuss what happened, Torah describes his condition as communion with God. His seizures, he believes, are the Holy Spirit working in his body. So deep is his belief that later he privately thanks Jesus for that seizure. And so convinced is he of this bodily connection to God that he only names his condition as epilepsy once, when an act of torture briefly lands him in the hospital. He makes this admission not as part of an honest medical history, but as an attempt to explain away bruises that Benno has inflicted on him. Benno naturally takes advantage of Tora's condition. In one of the film's darkest scenes, and there are multiple, Tora walks in on Benno molesting Sani. He finally displays some initiative in resisting Benno's authority by taking a phone to call for help. To stop him, Benno drops a cat that Tor has bonded with into a water barrel, challenging him to save it. This moment of distress and despair predictably triggers another seizure and bout of unconsciousness. When Tora awakes, the cat is dead. To him, however, this is a sign of his mission. And at this point, he prays to God, quote, "I know now Benno is my test, the one you sent me," end quote. Though he cannot save the poor cat, he vows to save Sani. In some ways, his plan works, though only after Tora has endured further torture and experienced a brief sense that God has abandoned him. Sani first finds her own ability to defy her parents when she takes Tora into town after Benno and Astrid force feed him rotten chicken and, keeping herself hidden, calls an ambulance to collect him, but doesn't yet seek help herself. Later in the film's climax, in which the adults fatally mutilate Tora and leave to dump his body, Sani escapes with her little brother Dennis. The film's final sequence moves from a shot of Tora's face as he lies dead to Sani and her brother on their way out of the allotment. And unbelievably, if you're not familiar with the film, the shot of his face on the screen right now is not actually the shot I'm talking about. It is amazing how difficult it is to get shots from this movie. If you don't own the digital copy, if you're kind of a little bit of a Luddite like me and you prefer physical media. All right. So I'm not done with Nothing Bad Can Happen yet, but I'm going to move on to Saint Maud for a few moments, and then I'm going to combine the two films. So I'll go a summary of this one as well, though it is far more famous than Nothing Bad Can Happen. So I imagine a lot of folks who are currently watching or will in the future watch this will have seen it. So following a traumatic incident in which a patient dies in her care, a Welsh nurse named Maud, currently, but previously called Katie, adopts an ascetic form of personal Catholicism and becomes a private carer. Assigned to provide palliative care to Amanda, a former ballerina and atheist who is dying of cancer, Maud seeks to bring herself and Amanda closer to God. Maud frequently experiences seizures that she interprets as direct contact with God, and as her mental health declines, she embarks on a journey of self-harm, which she believes God will use her to convert others. In doing so, she once again loses her job, plummets into crisis, is sexually assaulted, and shifts from being a carer to a destroyer. Becoming increasingly delusional, Maud eventually kills Amanda and herself, setting herself on fire on a beach before horrified witnesses. Where religious asceticism and mortification came late in the process of character creation for Nothing Bad Can Happen, Maud's faith was very much part of her from the outset, as writer and director Rose Glass reveals that in her original concept, Maud was a nun. Over time, per Glass's account, the story shifted from a sadomasochistic, psychosexual, imagined affair with God to an exploration of the eponymous character's worsening mental illness. And where Nothing Bad Can Happen leaves it up to the viewer to decide, likely based on their own personal feelings about faith, whether or not Tora is truly in tune with God. It is undebatable that Maud's connection to the divine is largely a product of delusion. Unlike Tora, Maud loses her grip on physical reality, frequently dissociating and, by the end of the film, experiencing visual and auditory hallucinations. The most telling of these, and the one that extra-textually confirms the delusional nature of Maud's communication with God, occurs when God finally appears to answer Maud in her native Welsh. The voice of God is actually performer Morveth Clark's own voice, digitally altered to sound much deeper, a deliberate choice by the filmmakers to confirm that the God Maud believes she has been communicating with is simply herself. Maud's seizures are also triggered by overstimulation and distress, but there is also an overly erotic quality to them, leading Glass to refer to them as godgasms. Twice, these fits of combined fear and ecstasy occur after Maud has had close, even suggestive contact with Amanda, who is herself queer. Where Tora is given the queered status of a sexual outsider per Delarue by his genuine celibacy, the film heavily implies that Maud's desire to spiritually convert Amanda is entwined with repressed erotic desire for her. Unable to reconcile such feelings to her self-imposed asceticism, Maud conflates the two, causing her to become manipulative and even violent toward Amanda, though always couching her actions in faith rather than conscious desire. Yet, in one dramatic scene, a seizure enables her to move away from trauma. Feeling abandoned by God, Maud embarks on a night of binge drinking and casual sex, which leads to a rape. When she returns home, physically sick and in despair, a nearby firework display triggers a seizure, during which Maud perceives herself as levitating. And this is the shot we see here. The next morning, Maud feels firmly back in God's good graces and recommits to her mission. Her voiceover describes the night's events, including this levitating seizure, as a revelation. Tora's spiritual affiliation is consistent with the specific evangelical subsect he has joined in its iconography and in its interest in simple forms of asceticism. But there is a murkiness to Maud's that sheds additional light on her journey into self-mortification and annihilation. Catholic film critic and horror reviewer J.P. Nunez notes a great contradiction in the way Maud's faith is imagistically characterized, even down to barely visible background details, versus her practice, arguing that the former is distinctly Catholic while the latter is distinctly not. For instance, as Nunez notes, there is not a single depiction of Maud attending Mass, going to confession, receiving communion, or even speaking to a spiritually like-minded person. Because of this, Nunez argues that Maud appears to have created a superficial and solitary version of Catholicism based less on theology and more on a deep psychological need for a strict and prohibitive guiding force, which is very clearly, I would argue, influenced by this history of saint and martyr iconography and this prescription of bodily mortification. Maud's self-mortification is truly entirely self-imposed, with the exception of the sexual assault. Where her predecessor, Tora, submits to acts of violence, Maud perpetrates violence against herself, engaging in a number of self-harm behaviors. These clearly bring her pain, but she perceives herself as growing closer to fulfilling God's purpose for her. One such instance directly utilizes the imagery of sainthood as Maud places tacks through an image of a saint and inserts it into her shoe, then embarks on an agonizing walk through the city. Her expression becomes one of acceptance and even enjoyment, echoing the mingling of terror and pleasure in her seizures. She appears to interpret each moment of self-inflicted discomfort as both a test she passes and a means of maintaining her connection to a God she can't see but can certainly, through pain, feel. Maud's journey towards self-annihilation seems destined for such a destructive ending. As addicted to the gratification she receives through self-harm, it is natural that her actions will escalate. As the film draws to its end, Maud's neurological responses to distress shift from seizures to hallucinations. Having killed Amanda after imagining that Amanda has become demonically possessed, Maud hallucinates golden wings emanating from her body. The following morning, as she sets herself ablaze on the beach, the wings reappear, and she at first perceives the flames as a painless glow and iridescence around her that the witnesses do, in her perception, indeed recognize as divine. And fair warning, I've been using stills. In the next slide, I am going to have moving images of the really disturbing death scene. So fair warning on that. Okay. Yet as the film reminds us that such things are only in Maud's head, for literally one shocking second, we see Maud outside the hallucination, engulfed in flames, flesh charred beyond recognition, shrieking in agony. But I want to problematize assumptions about St. Maud's ending because we, the viewers, can see all the clues in the film that Maud is quite mentally ill and that her connection to God is the product of an untreated mental illness and a lack of support, but more on that in a moment. This ending is often discussed quite cynically. Maud's pain in that final second, we typically assume, confirms that she was wrong about it all, that she is nothing special, and that she has destroyed her life and her body in vain. In some fan discussions that read the film through a Christian worldview, there is even speculation that what we see in the final shot is not Maud burning alive on the beach anymore, but Maud burning in hell, having been damned for killing Amanda. However, if we locate within the film within that larger tradition of mortification and annihilation, there isn't necessarily a contradiction between the screaming agony of Maud's final moments and the possibility that she has achieved some kind of martyrdom, not by enemies' hands, but by her own mental illness. Right, and if anybody was looking away to avoid the death scene in motion, it is over now. But as a substitute, I know you should never have a huge wall of text that goes with, just one particular slide, but unfortunately, that's what I've done. So I guess enjoy these shots for quite a long time. All right, so now I'm going to place Nothing Bad Can Happen and St. Maud into closer conversation with each other, as I believe they are, despite their disturbing nature, quite good examples of horror that addresses social problems. The characters, as I hope has been clear in my presentation of them, are extremely similar. The similarity I want to delve more deeply into here, though, especially with regard to the idea of annihilation, is their isolation. Both Tora and Maud are dealing with trauma even before the narratives of their respective films. Tora through unspecified events that have rendered him without familial connections or a home, as he alludes to having slept on the streets before finding the Jesus freaks, and Maud through the violent loss of her patient. When we focus on their social isolation, we immediately see how the path of mortification and death became open to them. Having already experienced homelessness and we may safely assume other types of deprivation, Tora is able to accept the deprivation Benno inflicts upon him to interpret it as divinely ordained asceticism. Likewise, Maud's close physical and visual contact with her patient as their body literally splits open due to her desperate ministrations creates an immediate connection between bodily mortification and transcendence of the spirit into death that makes it easy to see how she might, in her trauma, need to justify pain. Yet, despite both of them being at high risk to be victimized, there are not adequate safety nets to slow their descent or ascent into torment and death. Both films inherently problematize the role of religious communities. Nothing Bad Can Happen's opening scenes of Tor closely surrounded by other Jesus freaks at his baptism is quickly challenged when we see him interacting with the freaks later. At a communal meal, Tora loses his seat to a newcomer, an attractive young woman, and nobody seems to notice that once she joins their table, Tora is literally left on the outskirts of the group. Likewise, at the Jesus Freaks bar, Tora is surrounded by others, yet not a single one of them appears to notice when he has a seizure. In fact, they continue dancing around him, and it is Benno who sees that he is in trouble and rescues him from being trampled on the floor. Nor do any of the other freaks seem to notice that a strange man is carrying Tora off. We are left wondering, in fact, if any of Tora's friends are actually his friends at all. Theology aside, religion is often a means by which people forge and maintain community. Tora, however, is a true believer to the point that his belief in his own connection to Christ supersedes community. He is genuinely horrified to learn that other freaks don't take their ascetic rules as seriously as he does, and after he leaves the communal house, we see no evidence that a single other freak was concerned for him. Halfway through the film, he does briefly reconnect with Al, who apologizes for his own hypocrisy and shocks Tora with the news that the Jesus Freaks of Hamburg have dissolved and their scene is now in Berlin. He invites Tora to Berlin with him, but at this point is far too late. Tora, covered in bruises from Benno's abuse, is already on his mission. What stands out here is that Al sees the signs of abuse and is concerned, but ultimately he does not intervene any further. Here, his friend is waving every red flag that he has taken the freak's ideology so seriously that he is being victimized. Yet Al takes him at his word that everything is fine, or at least uses Tora's assurances as justification for not probing more into how exactly Tora is practicing his faith these days. Likewise, Maud speaks of no family relationships and has no faith community at all, despite appearing to have adopted a faith that requires communal participation even in the conversion process. In his reading of the film from a Catholic lens, Nunez points out that Maud's isolation is very significant to understanding what subsequently happens to her. As with Tora, there are a number of red flags around Maud that would, in an ideal world, have prompted supportive intervention. Within the course of a year, Maud has experienced a violent and traumatic loss of a patient in her care, has subsequently left or lost her job, taken on a new name, adopted a new faith, and changed her lifestyle entirely to one of traditionalist asceticism. We might like to think that such drastic changes in such a short amount of time, especially following an incident that would have been documented at work, would have at least shown up in the vetting process for her new job, and thus prevented her from being placed into an arrangement that just further isolates her and also places a dying woman at risk. The only two people who recognize that Maud needs help are Amanda and Joy, a nurse Maud once worked with but was not actually friends with. Both do try to reach her, but Amanda's atheism and Joy's connection to Maud's old life as Katie mean that Maud does not recognize their attempts as valid. The problem as presented in these films is not that Tora and Maud are religious, and it's in this that I find both Gebbe and Glass to have taken a very bold approach, especially as filmmakers who have explicitly stated a lack of interest in religion in these films. Rather, the problem is that in their isolation and trauma, they have subscribed to an ascetic, self-destructive interpretation of how to live out their faith. Steeped, respectively, in traditions of mortification and rhetoric about the annihilation of the self, leading to union with the divine, they turn to the literal bodily manifestation of these traditions, with no one close enough to them to offer them alternative means of processing their trauma, redirecting their faith practices, or even finding respite. And what I see in their narratives is a critique of the ways that isolation enables marginalization and destruction, and the ways that the iconography and rhetoric of mortification in religions like Christianity may inadvertently encourage vulnerable people who truly believe to accept them or to even harm themselves. Lacking healthy models in a faith community or a spiritual director who might help her unpack the saintly narratives that have clearly had such a profound influence on her, Maud similarly adopts the belief that her mental and physical anguish are divinely ordained and must become worse in order to deepen her relationship with God. The two people in her life who are concerned for her, as I've noted, are disconnected from her faith, and they don't recognize some of the signs that this is going to lead inevitably to Maud's ruin. And even if they did, they would have been powerless to stop her. As Maud pours the flammable liquid over herself at the beach, we faintly hear onlookers realizing what's about to happen and protesting, but at this point, there is little or nothing that they can do either. In a key scene toward the beginning of Nothing Bad Can Happen, two lines spoken by Jesus freaks in the bar herald what will happen to Tora. Standing right next to Tora, Al paraphrases a verse that appears in all four Gospels. Quote, "Whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for Christ will save it." End quote. Seconds later, paraphrasing verses from the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, an older member of the Jesus Freaks preaching at the bar reminds the freaks that they are to turn the other cheek if set upon by enemies, warning that it is not an easy path, but one that will nonetheless lead to eternal life with Christ. Surely neither this speaker nor Al would have ever thought that someone hearing them would take their words quite literally and to the point that Tora does. But only minutes after these proclamations, Tora is delivered into the hands of the enemy who will put his belief in these verses to the test. Yet Tora and Maud are inconvenient victims of this tragic nexus of isolation and faith. They are, as some critics have pointed out, difficult for most people to empathize with or to romanticize, two key qualities that society often requires of marginalized and vulnerable people if their needs are to receive attention and support. Maud is an inconvenient person. She is socially awkward and arrogant. Her self-righteousness makes her all the more inconvenient because she ultimately neither desires help nor recognizes the need for it, and it is undoubtable that she would find herself morally superior to anyone who dared try to intervene for her own good, as she does with Amanda and Joy. Alternatively, such attempts also trigger her psychosis in the film. What she appears to need is a supportive structure that meets her where she is, whether in her profession or in her faith, but it is difficult or even impossible to connect an unwilling person to these. Ironically, had she lived to be held accountable for Amanda's murder, her crime is the only thing that would have prompted a disruption to her solitary and delusional path. Tora is also an inconvenient person. He is socially awkward and not particularly charming in the mainstream sense, though I will say I think his character is great. He is not physically strong enough for manual labor, and his other job prospects are quite slim, given that he has been living a transient life for some time and is prone to seizures when overstimulated or distressed. Lacking social or financial capital, he offers nothing in return except his state welfare card, which he gives to Benno. He cannot be dissuaded from his faith. In two powerful voiceovers, after Benno literally sells Tora's body to a sex club, Tora connects his suffering to the impending completion of his mission. The first one, quote, from the English translation. Though I walk in the flesh, I do not war according to the flesh, for the weapons of my warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God. Nothing bad can happen to him who carries the shield of faith. Even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. End quote. And as he washes the blood away following a subsequent rape, his voiceover is one of self-assurance. Quote, I am abused, but not killed. I am dying, yet possess.
I know. I can totally understand.
Excuse
Okay.
me, Donald, I think you have your
I'll,
microphone
I'll
on. Can you
watch the
please
dog.
mute yourself?
Did you have a good bath? Did you want to listen in?
Okay, I'm seeing if I can figure out how to
Oops.
mute.
Yeah.
I did it. Okay. Sorry,
Sorry,
please continue.
sorry. So these characters ask secular or even anti-religious communities to recognize that vulnerable people do not always fit into the ideal secular molds or outside of the topic of religion, their equivalents. If both Maud and Tora initially found comfort and from their trauma in faith, robbing them of that would also be traumatic and, I would argue, unethical. So how can they be helped if the ground on which they must be met is so alienating? Likewise, they ask religious communities to exercise greater discernment in their support of vulnerable members and in their own rhetoric. As I stated a few minutes ago, surely neither the older Jesus freak preaching nor Al anticipated someone abiding by their words quite literally in the home of a predator who tortures them. Yet these films pose the question, what if they did? There are no easy answers to these questions in the films or in real life. So as if to point out this lack of convenient solutions, both films, the films bring both characters to utmost destruction. To the characters within their own minds, complete annihilation is necessary. Otherwise, both Tora and Maud risk another depressive episode that may result in even more subjugation of a kind they do not choose. In this case, for both of them, sexual assault. But it is also necessary for the narratives when read outside of these characters' focalizations. Otherwise, Tora and Sani will continue to be abused or, fleeing without adequate support, will find themselves once more in isolation and trauma, and Maud is going to jail. Here we are faced with the imperative for marginalized people to disappear or to be annihilated, whether through their own actions or through the actions of others, lacking an easy answer on how these characters and people like them might be supported. The answer that we're given is, I don't know. Best if we don't see them anymore. Best if we don't have to think about them anymore. And I'm of course referring to larger society, not the filmmakers themselves, who have clearly put actually quite a lot of love and care into creating these vulnerable characters. All right. So now I want to turn in a slightly different direction to further unpack these films' relationships to women's horror and women in horror. And to do so, I'm going to place them in conversation with two others that chronologically bookend them, Martyrs and Bring Her Back. While written and directed by male filmmakers, both films create strong depictions not only of women's pain, but also of women's violence, and it is the latter that I want to focus on. So I'm not sure how much of an introduction it needs, but Martyrs is, while overlooked in the mainstream recognition of its artistry, one of the quintessential cinematic texts within the New French Extremity movement. A traumatized young woman, Lucy, having been held in captivity and tortured by an unknown group of people in her childhood, seeks vengeance against her former captors 15 years later, but her trauma overcomes her once she has killed them and she commits suicide. Her friend Anna, who has expressed doubts about Lucy's identification of her captor so many years later, is left behind to discover that Lucy was correct. In her attempt to help the group's current captive, Anna is herself captured. The group's leader, a woman addressed only as Mademoiselle, reveals the group's intentions. While decrying religion itself, the group, or cult, really, I would argue, believes that women in the greatest throes of abject suffering are capable of seeing the other side of death, and for a brief moment might relay these revelations to the living. Under Mademoiselle's direction, they imprison and torture captives in an attempt to force the conditions of martyrdom, a state that the film's ending title card reminds us is technically the state of witnessing. And you know what? Even though it came out 20 years ago or nearly 20 years ago, I'm not going to say how it ends apart from that title card, just in case there is someone who hasn't seen it. All right, then some brief words on Bring Her Back. I'll explain why there's lack of images right there in a second. So Bring Her Back also deals with trauma, grief, and women directing great violence toward innocence without the usual reasons we see in so many cliched films like jealousy, attraction, rejection, or revenge. I really hate to spoil this one because it only came out last year and I'm tired of film discourse giving folks only a short period of time to get up to speed on some movies. And this especially because I think it's best if a viewer goes into this film with no idea what's going to happen at all. So, I guess if you haven't seen Bring Her Back and want to do so unspoiled, you can mute your audio after this slide until you see a slide that shows only Tora and Maud and tells you to unmute. And just know that where mainstream film awards are concerned, lead actress Sally Hawkins and makeup effects team Scarecrow Studios were robbed, at least of nominations, because they would have also been up against Sinners and Weapons. So good year for horror at the mainstream award shows, but could have been better with this one. All right, so if you really want the Martyrs discussion, but you understandably can't bear to have Bring Her Back spoiled, I've got my contact information at the end of this presentation, and you can reach out to me and I can send you a version of the script that completely omits Bring Her Back. All right, so for anyone who wants to avoid spoilers of this fairly recent movie, you can mute now, and there will be a visual cue to unmute in a few minutes. All right. Okay, so this film depicts a grieving mother, Laura, who fosters two teenage children, Andy and Piper, after the death of her biological daughter, Kathy. Andy, who is sighted while Piper is blind and who is suffering from his own trauma at having been abused by their father, is unsettled to see that Laura has another child living with her, a young boy who doesn't speak, looks to be in a perpetual state of shock, and keeps trying to eat the family cat. To make a long story short, in a wild plot, it turns out that Laura has kidnapped the boy and performed an occult ritual on him that she learned about through an illicit dark web videotape. And by the way, there's a whole ARG based around that tape. And if you like horror ARGs that don't actually require you to participate, it is horrifying and awesome. So through this ritual, Laura has caused the boy to become possessed by a demonic entity or an angelic one. And there is debate on this. And this entity can literally consume Kathy's soul from her corpse and vomit it into Piper's body, thus returning Kathy to Laura. Now, I find these films interesting in conversation with Nothing Bad Can Happen in St. Maud in a number of ways, and I believe they form a perfect quadrilogy of completely unrelated films that happen to explore similar questions through mortification. As evident from these summaries in these two films, mortification is not performed on the self, but on innocent, unconsenting victims. And I have a couple of things to say about this. First, this juxtaposition enables placement of Gebbe's and Glass's films within the larger theme of interiority in women's texts, a theme which has been particularly explored in literary scholarship in German and, respectively, British women's writing, and those are the origins for Gebbe and Glass. The experiences of Tora and Maud are quite self-contained. We get to know their true beliefs and ways of perception through their inner monologues, both of which also function as prayers. Conversely, Mademoiselle and Laura reveal their intentions through dialogue and confrontations with innocents they have traumatized, and their speech functions as exposition that explains what exactly has been going on the whole time in their increasingly bizarre narratives. What Mademoiselle and Laura are feeling internally, any doubts they may possess, any introspection, any feelings toward their captives or the work they're doing, remains a mystery that the viewer is not privy to. In this unwitting quadrilogy, self-mortification goes hand in hand with psychological interiority, while mortification of others bars that interiority completely. My second point is really more of an addendum to the first, as I believe it also relates to interiority. Both Mademoiselle and Laura seek communion with the other side to bring about their own revelations. For Mademoiselle, the forbidden knowledge of what lies after death. For Laura, the reclamation of her daughter from death. And both of these constitute types of transcendence. In these films, both require mortification of the flesh and annihilation of the tormented subject, but neither Mademoiselle nor Laura are willing to undergo that mortification themselves. Here, we find a stark contrast between their selfishness and the selfishness that is evident in Maud, and that one or two critics have even posited might be present to a small degree in Tora as well. They are violent in their goals and ability to see destruction, but they refuse to turn that violence inward, even though, for Mademoiselle, this requires the entire cult to undergo decades of work. And for Laura, this would be logistically easier than kidnapping a child, fostering another, setting up a scenario to remove the extraneous foster child who is witnessing all this, and then somehow dealing with the possessed captive after the transfer of soul and life is complete. Unlike Maud, Mademoiselle will not endure the pain of mortification in her goals, and unlike Tora, Laura will not offer up her own body as a sacrifice for the good of the child to whom she wishes to give life. Tora and Maud accept the yoke of abjecting themselves, while Mademoiselle and Laura seem to abject the notion of self-abjection. And my third point regards women's propensity for violence. In all four films, a woman directs mortification to the point of murder or suicide. It's obvious in three of them, so I'll just briefly point out that in Nothing Bad Can Happen, it is Benno's wife, Astrid, who initiates forcibly feeding Tora the rotten meat, and it is Astrid and her friend Cora who mortally wound Tora, an act that Benno looks away from. As an appreciator of female villains, I believe these films should all get more credit, or some credit, since Bring Her Back hasn't had time to yet, for resisting many of the stereotypical tropes of women's violence in horror by not grounding their motives in romantic or sexual jealousy or a past history of rape that spurs on their violent behavior. And that's not to knock the rape revenge film. Of course, it's a super important part of the horror canon. But we see that so often when a filmmaker wants a reason for a woman to become violent. So I just really like it when female villains in horror are just straight up depraved, cruel, and here for the gore. All right. Okay, so people who may have muted to avoid spoilers for Bring Her Back, you can unmute now. If it's not too late where you are and you want to feel really, really bad, go watch that movie after this, and feel free to DM me your thoughts on that one. Okay, so now I'm just going to tie this whole thing together. There are actually about 3 single-space pages of additional notes, ideas, and arguments about these films and their relationship to mortification below this point in my script, including an overly enthusiastic ramble about the final glimpses of the faces of Tora, Maud, and another character from one of the other 2 movies that I can't identify if I'm going to skip relating the last third of Martyrs and the entirety of Bring Her Back for the folks who had to mute. Nothing Bad Can Happen and Saint Maud are powerful pieces of women's filmmaking, not limited to, but especially within the horror genre. Their depictions of mortification and self-annihilation are rich, complex, and uneasy in their resistance to simple readings. Their place within bleak cinema and amongst so-called disturbing films, while such films are often problematic and always controversial, speaks to the power of women's horror films to challenge viewer sensibilities, to critique social problems in uncomfortable ways, and to leave the viewer truly horrified. And when we put them into conversation with other films that create interesting relationships between mortification of the flesh and gender, with a focus on women's roles within the relationship, we find even more space to recognize the powerful potential of women as creators, as characters, or as both, to uncover what Isabel Pinedo describes as horror's revelation of the secrets of the flesh, or the wet death. Um, that is it. Here are my references. Thank you for coming to this talk. For those of you in time zones where it's night, or anyone who may be watching this later, but at night, sorry if you have nightmares. Sorry. And if anyone does want to get in touch with me about disturbing cinema, or you go watch one of these films that you haven't seen afterward, I have a brand new Instagram because my personal one became all pictures of my cat. So brand new, there's barely any content on it, but you can find me at Tasha_terror. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. That was really compelling. Yeah, I loved how you compared these two really important films. And as you said, Torah tanzt is really not talked about at all, I feel like. So it's really wonderful. Now, people, if you want to ask questions, please do in the chat, or also turn on your video. And after else, this is, go free, go wild. I was again, there's so many things to compare between the two films and the two figures, the main protagonists. But I wonder if you have things to say about, I'm sure you do, about Tora being kind of a pure soul and Maud being a tormented soul, and how that relates to self-annihilation and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good contrast to draw between them. I think one of the things, as I kind of noted briefly in the talk, that I think is actually quite brave of Katrin Gebbe to do is to not present Torah as a religious hypocrite, and to allow him to not only keep his faith, but to live out his practice as morbid as it is. Like he remains, he's a pure soul. His soul is never compromised by what happens to him. And I know I've spoiled this one for anyone who hasn't seen it. But I mean, in the end, and that's something that part of those 3 pages of single space notes at the bottom goes over. At the end, he still clings to that sense of purity within himself, and the viewer is able to recognize it as well. In the end, he actually does, as I say, he kind of wins. It's unfortunate. It's like the thing that said at the bar, he loses his life, but he won. And Maud, and I think it's actually quite an interesting thing in terms of gendered characterizations, because often we see women presented as pure souls, and men get the romanticized torment, and it's reversed here. And I think with Maud, what's interesting about her tormentedness is, yeah, she does some really messed up things in the movie. I'm not gonna deny that. But I also can't help but see her as not quite an innocent the way Torah is. But I don't, this is horrible to say because she murders somebody. I don't think she's a bad person. I think she is an extremely vulnerable young woman. And going back to that isolation, I did not say this in the presentation, but one of the things that the other nurse, Joy, says to her when they reconnect regards that traumatic incident where Maud loses a patient because their body literally splits open as she's trying to help them. And Joy tells her, we all should have been there to help you. So we know that Maud's inciting incident of trauma, she was completely alone in this and left to deal with this horrible sight on her own. And I think as much as she is that kind of tormented soul and she actually does some really horrible stuff, I do think that there is still a kind of purity to her that we see in her annihilation. Like I personally like the reading that sure, we see her burning alive at the end, but that doesn't make her not a martyr, you know? Like the pictures I showed at the beginning, all that hurt too. So I'm being very flippant about torture here. I'm very sorry.
Um, yeah, I also had to think of I don't know if you have thoughts on Breaking the Waves, Lars von Trier's Breaking the Waves, and in connection to Tora Tunst, because she's also a figure who has faith and
Yes.
murders
And
herself.
mhm. And that's one of those movies I saw way too young. I need to do a rewatch of that actually sometime. And what I think is really interesting about their similarity, and I believe Katrin Gebbe has even cited Breaking the
Oh, yeah.
Waves as one of her inspirations, is sorry to spoil Breaking the Waves for anybody, but it similarly creates this idea that, okay, so she has suffered immensely. She has undergone the worst mortification of the flesh, but it worked. Maybe? Did it
Maybe.
work? Was she right? I mean, and that's so uncomfortable to to deal with. I've seen
Mm,
more and more people who watch Breaking the Waves in more recent years for the first time say that they are extremely uncomfortable with the end because it doesn't condemn what she did. It leaves it a little bit open there. And I do think we've got room to see that with Maud and with Tora. And I think that I mean it is also part of that bleak cinema thing. It is a feel bad movie right there. I mean,
yeah.
yeah. I actually thought about mentioning it in the talk, but I'm like, I can't throw that one in there as well.
Yeah, big fan of feel bad cinema here. So,
Yes.
Melissa asks, I did have mute at the end. That's very considerate of you as well to do that. Tasha, so if you talked about this at the end, I apologize, but I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on mental mortification or self-harming thoughts, symbols of depression, etc. I was thinking of the Austrian film Das Teufelsbad, yeah, the Devil's Bath, if you've seen that one.
That is that the one with the neck sewing?
Hmm.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. Okay, thank you for the translation because I saw this in the comment here, Melissa, and I was even thinking like, oh no, I haven't seen that. No, I have seen that. Um, I don't remember it very well. Um, so I think that mental mortification is something that is extremely important in these narratives. I feel like cinema does not always treat it with the same gravity because it is not, if we don't couple it with some gore, it is not as visually shocking or appealing or even attention grabbing. But I mean, I think things that if we want to think of mental mortification, of where we can even locate that historically, there are plenty of narratives. If we look at the tradition I've been talking about, there are plenty of narratives where the suffering person suffers mental anguish, propensities towards suicidal ideation, self-harm without the context of thinking that it is part of their divine communion before they come to the mortification of the flesh. And oh, and the devil's back. Oh God, this is horrible because I'm so sorry. All I remember about it is the neck.
Maybe
Um,
there are examples of other films that kind
well,
of deal with.
I can say I remember enjoying The Devil's Bath and thinking I really need to rewatch this sometime and get more from it than because I was also very distracted when I read it. Okay. Other films that do the psychological mortification.
Just to add, they definitely also there's a lot of bodily mortification in the Devil's Bath too,
Yeah.
such as the poster image. So it's there, the spectacle of the torture, self-torture
Yeah,
is there
yeah,
as
you gotta have, but I am interested in the idea though of, I mean, and I will admit I'm a gore hound. I mean, I love gory movies. I will watch anything with gore. I don't even care if the plot's bad. I love that stuff. But I would be interested in the idea of like a film that is purely psychological in mortification and doesn't go to the spectator sport of the destroyed body. And of course, though I am really struggling to think of one, though I know they exist. I know I've seen them. No, no, it's fine, Melissa. It's fine because I'm also like spur of the moment, like they totally exist. What are they? Yeah, maybe I'll hit, like hit me up on Instagram or something sometime and I'll we can unpack this more when I've had time to think about it.
Um, I like how you mentioned or really get detailed about also the background, the director's thought process, while making it, and that in a way they're not focused on religion in a sense. It's more like a metaphor, like a way to a vehicle for this. But I was wondering if you have examples of, I mean, I guess I can think of one big one that is kind of, but of like horror films that deal with religion or people with faith that is kind of casting faith in a positive light.
Mhm.
Just
Okay, this may be controversial. The Exorcist.
that's the one I was thinking. Yeah.
I think that The Exorcist is not an anti-religious film, which is funny that it caused so much religious controversy because it's like I kind of see The Exorcist as also a little bit of a love letter to that type of story. It takes it very seriously. I mean, it's funny sometimes, but it also confronts us with that idea of if this is what a demonic possession did to somebody, well, here's how horrible it would be. This is what it would be like to see an innocent girl turned into this. For Father Karras, like this is a true dark night of the soul here that he goes into and is actually victorious, though it does cost him his own body and life. And we won't talk about The Exorcist 3 right there and what it does to that narrative. Though admittedly, I love the last 30 minutes of The Exorcist 3. Um, so yeah, so that is one. Let's see, what's another like really good? The Omen. Something about all the omens. Actually, the new one with, oh, what's it called? The first omen, the
Right.
proto omen, the omen before the omen was the
First,
omen, whatever it
first.
is. Yeah, I actually thought it was quite good. I don't like what they did with the jackal. I prefer the original jackal, but whatever. Um, the nun in the Conjuring universe. I have a weakness for the nun. That's my favorite part of the Conjuring universe. It's like so outside of it, and I'm like, no, that's the good one. No offense to anybody who loves the Conjuring universe, but I think but that's it's still quite mainstream. I'm going quite mainstream here, but those are also very easily found and
Hmm.
accessed, and they're a bit more a popcorn movie rather than. I don't think I ever want to watch television again after I just saw this, which is what I've been doing. So, nice to have a popcorn movie in the mix.
Speaking of religious horror, have you seen Alucarda? And do you have
Oh,
thoughts on okay, because there's like a lot of collective self-mortification in that film with nuns self-flagellating in big groups, nuns
no,
and priests
I
in
need
these
to,
like
I
group
know.
formations.
Yeah, I really want to watch it. I keep putting it off. It's like one of those things that's so like hype to me now that I'm like, I need to save this for a moment where I can just really sit down with it and give it my undivided entire attention and it's hard to do that these days. But I know I haven't seen it. I really need to.
It's a lot of fun actually. So it, in case you're, I
Yeah.
don't know, conflating
ridiculous.
it into something that something that intimidating or whatever that's going to require your full attention. I think it's actually just a lot of fun.
Okay. That's good to know. I didn't know that it was more fun than I never want to watch TV again. That's good. Thank you. That's very good to know. I might watch that later then.
It's pretty wild.
All right. Amy asks, is there an aspect on the theme of mortification, annihilation, transcendence that you've never seen covered in a horror film that you'd like to see?
This is funny because I know Amy. An aspect of mortification, and see, I feel like it's a trick question because I know Amy. An aspect on the theme of mortification and annihilation and transcendence I've never seen. Let's see. I can't say that there's one that I've never seen, but I would like to see more of a focus on the mortified body as simultaneously beautiful and horrifying within within that context. I mean, we've got plenty of those, but I think what I'd like to see is something like, what if we did Saint Maud meets Hellraiser? You know, either the old one or the new one, because they both have absolutely gorgeous bodily destruction going on.
I was thinking about Hellraiser earlier. Just
Yeah.
came up in my, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's great for that like marriage of pain and pleasure and the
No.
the mortification of the flesh being a type of transcendence where it's like, well, this is gonna hurt, but it's what you asked for. You know, you wanted to see the end of extremity. So this is what it is. You know, enjoy having your flesh ripped from your bones and becoming all this weird stuff. I'm actually hoping for a sequel to the new Hellraiser, by the way. I feel like they had some interesting stuff going on there. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of probably not the strongest answer, but I would really like to see more and more of this transformation of the body that we get to linger on even. It's not just a quick flash. That'd be expensive though.
Are you familiar with the another German film, Station of the Cross, which came out, um, I think 10 years ago or something? Which again is it's weird because German is not really big on horror, contemporary, landscape at least. And I mean, it's not a horror film, but it's about this girl, a little girl who also goes, through these stations, as tormented kind of torture stations of the cross, basically. So
I haven't seen it. I need to see that.
I mean, it's not a great film, and but it's just maybe on topic with,
Sure, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, again, I'm a gore hound. I watch complete crap sometimes just for
It's
the
more like in a way the dull drama version. It's not really
oh,
gonna
okay.
gonna please you that way, I think. But
It's fine. I like the theme, you know. It's
yeah. And also in your intro and or your bio, you talk about working on a film. Could you maybe talk about that a bit, or is that
it
too?
is very much in its infancy. So it's not something that will be it's not something that anyone in the public will see for a very long time. As in I am not even done writing it. It's in a horrible mess of pieces on my computer. Um, but yeah, I've decided having left academia exactly 2 years ago now, I've devoted a lot of my life to studying other people's horror, and I'm feeling very much like I want to make my own. What if I try this? But I'm very much doing it from the writing standpoint. I don't intend to try directing. I would, if it comes to fruition, I would like to be in the room sometimes, but no. Um, but yeah, it actually, one of the things that has been slow in the process is because of it's actually my fascination with mortification. I I keep having these images of some gore that I would like. And then I'm always stuck thinking, but how would that be done in practice? That's going to be expensive. And it's like, no, you don't think about that when you're writing it. That's someone else's problem. And a few people have even told me that who know I'm working on it. Like, don't worry about the practicality when you write it. But I keep getting stuck on that. Um, but yeah, hopefully sometime maybe 5 years from now, I'll have a little thing that's not just me rambling about other people's horror.
And will we one day see Hellraiser meets Saint Maud in
I
in a work that
would
you're making?
I would absolutely love that. Um,
Melissa asks, the films you mentioned are mostly contemporary. Have you encountered older films to channel this topic? Self-mortification specifically done by female characters.
yes. Let's see, what are some of the older ones? Oh, what is
I keep having flashes of films, but it's like at past 11 p.m. here, so I'm like
yeah.
I'm just
Oh,
failing to hold on to a coherent thought at
yeah,
this point. But sorry to
exactly.
interrupt.
No, 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 no. I'm totally with you on that. I'm like, I have like this image of like, okay, there's the one where a woman like cuts a side of her, and it's not a Saw movie. It's like a it's like a serious like mortification thing.
Have you seen
And
In My Skin? I wanted to mention In My Skin earlier.
I love In My Skin.
And then also Cutting Moments. Have you seen Cutting
I've
Moments?
not seen Cutting Moments. I need to see Cutting Moments.
So
It's
you'd love
not,
that, I think. Yeah.
is it? I think it's not a feature length. Is it, Ellie? Or it's
No,
like
it's a
50
short.
minutes?
There's like a trilogy,
Mhm.
Mm.
like kind of like a, horrors in the home kind of trilogy, and that's only one I've seen actually, but it's like a part of a trilogy of short films.
Yeah. The first one, in My Skin, of course, it's more like this kind of like indulgence almost. Like it's not, I don't think there's any necessarily a spiritual component, if I'm remembering correctly, but it becomes this like very um, it's like it's this like internal, um, self-absorbed but like celebratory kind of process. And then in Cutting Moments, it's a punishment. It has to do with like patriarchy and domestic abuse and a woman, yeah, self-harming in response to the entrapment that she experiences. So these are, other systems in the second in Cutting Moments, a different system of oppression that's leading to this, or like I guess some hope at transcending by I don't know. No finished thought there. But I think In My Skin is an interesting one to look at in the context of this thought of I mean of this talk, even if it's not religious, because
Oh yeah,
it has
yeah.
a different transcendence. I would say there is a form of transcendence that she experiences.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of really good horror and body horror, even if it doesn't use a religious lens, deals with transcendence, especially when we have those films where the person is kind of fascinated by their own destruction. Um, yeah, In My Skin is so good. I love that movie.
We
Yeah.
showed it like 10 years ago, and I think we should show it again.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It was like, it's older now. There's people who haven't seen it. They can come see it and traumatize a whole new batch of people.
When is it 2001? Is that when it's from? Or 11?
Might be, or 2004,
It's
maybe.
It's
quite
anyone's
old.
game, but it's definitely more than 15 years old, possibly more than 20 years old, which isn't even that old, but in the realm of women-directed horror, it
Yeah.
is an early one.
2002.
2002, yeah. So
Hmm.
20 some years old. Yeah, I'm also curious now to think about it, or what are older films that are depicting this, especially ones made by women or written by women.
It's hilarious. And I'm going to draw a blank on this one as well. I can't remember. Well, this one is not made by women at all, but I can't remember if the Devils has self-mortification or just imposed mortification, but it came to mind just in terms of older films with mortification because I know it's like getting a new release or something. I keep seeing that on the interwebs, which is also a really traumatizing film. Um, Possibly not relevant to this question. It's just what popped in my head. Let's see.
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's and I'm like, am I conflating it with this like other nunsploitation movie right now? Because it's been a while since I watched it. Um, oh, this is embarrassing. I'm like totally like drawing a blank on this one as well, which is hilarious, Melissa, because I had like a whole filmography in a document as I was writing this presentation, and I was trying to pick like, do I want to mention any of these other ones? And now I really wish that I still had that list up.
There's a great movie called House of Whipcord that is like religious. It's like a nunsploitation, or at least, I mean, or it's more of like a women in prison kind of mixed with like moral correctionism and so on. In any case, there's a lot of like staged, like kind of campy, like BDSM abuse among women in that film. I have no idea how far off topic I'm getting right now, but it came to mind. I think it's yeah, it's less about self-mortification, but there's like a joyous sort of collectivizing of it. Um, yeah, over the top. In any case, maybe I'm starting to sundown over here prematurely.
Yeah, it's really late there.
Yeah.
Ellie, do you have any
Yeah,
last
maybe.
questions?
Yeah, class questions, anyone? If not, yeah, thanks everyone for. Oh yeah. Oh, do you see Torre or Maud as queer?
Oh, ooh. Mod, absolutely, especially because Rose Glass has actually talked about Maud as a queer character before, and as a queer writer director herself, I think that even though Glass, like Gebbe, has kind of disavowed any sense of religiosity in her own life, um, I think she did really seek something kind of relatable in Maud. And there is like a whole like trend of queer women's films where the body has to be destroyed. Um I know yesterday, someone presented on Lisa Brulman's Blew My Mind, and I think that's one of them. I think that Mia and Gianna, yeah, but that's another one where part of queerness is that destruction of the body. Um, Tora, I like Dominic Delarue's argument that Tora is queered in that he is a sexual outsider because he is truly committed to celibacy, to the point in the movie that he becomes visibly uncomfortable if he thinks that sexual attention or even romantic attention is directed toward him because Sani, the daughter, does develop a crush on him. Um, and I I'm reluctant to overextend the word queer, but I do think that Torah can be read within that spectrum, especially if we look at that argument that by truly adhering to a spiritually based celibacy, that he has also achieved outsider status. So I guess I don't know, watch it for Pride Month as well or something. It's a very disturbing pride if you put me in charge of the film list.
Well, thanks, Tasha. This
Thank
Thank you
you.
so
was
Thank
much.
great.
Thank you
It was
so much
really
for having me. This was
a pleasure.
wonderful. And I can't wait to catch up on the ones that I missed.
Thanks for
Thanks
closing
for
out the brain binge.
Sorry for the errors.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you all for being here for the weekend. And yeah, we'll be here soon. I get next year potentially. And maybe just I know it's late, but next time you'll see us in Berlin or our films is I guess Swamp Fest in September, the Metal Fest. If there are any Berliners here, we're going to that, and then we also have our Halloween event on October 31st. So yeah, we're active. We do stuff.
And then we'll be back in
Um,
March with the full
and we'll be
festival.
back in March. Yes. All right.
Right.
Have a good night, everyone, or a good day to you. Bye.
Thanks, Tom.